Well, this week continues our discussion from last week with this idea of the character of Yahovah. And this is something that I found is a revolutionary study. And it's revolutionary because it touches on the idea of why there is sin and suffering in the world. It touches on how things happen and kind of that progress. We're always looking for reasons why and how, and I have found that that answer was originally given to humanity at Mount Sinai. It was laid out before us, something very clear so we could understand and not kind of grapple in the dark, each of us going in our own way, wondering why things happen. So yeah, I'm kind of talk for just a minute, give some people a few minutes to get in because I did get a late start and I apologize for that. Yeah, I have Alicia and Jared here this weekend. We are having fun. I think we're gonna go biking tomorrow. It's a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And anyways, I thank you guys for spending your time with me and joining me. So let me make sure that everyone else is in the room. And let me just see. Okay. All right. Just have to check with that. All right. So we are going to go ahead and begin. And the first part is going to be just a little overview. And again, I am going to bug out of here so my little bobblehead is not in the way. And that, whoops, I'm always moving the screen instead. It's hard for me to get it to click on what I want it to. It usually takes just a minute, and then we'll switch slides here. And so what we are looking at, again, we are focusing on the Yahovah's covenant of mercy. And this is the idea that Yahovah has told us the limits, the greatness and the vastness of his grace and the limits of his mercy. So both in the Sinai as well as the Deuteronomy covenant, we have the exact same parameters. Let me help one more person get into the room. I am not always good at multitasking. So I'm just trying to help a few more people get in, and then we'll just dig right in. So specifically what we are going to be focusing on both this weekend and next weekend is this aspect of the covenant where it says that Yahovah visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. And what I want to do is give you guys some practical examples of this in scripture. So we are going to be looking at several case studies. I have 3 individual case studies, and then beyond that, we're going to broaden it to some very generalized. But this one, I believe, is probably one of the best stories that tells us or shows us how this works in reality. First, I want to step back for a minute and return to the law and look at this concept of blood guilt. Now, this is specifically where a person has shed innocent blood. And what we are told in Numbers, you shall take no satisfaction for the life of a murderer, which is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death. So shall you not pollute the land where you are in, for blood defiles the land, and the land cannot be cleansed by the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that sheds it. Defile not the land, therefore, which you go in to inhabit, for I dwell there. For I, Yahovah, dwell among the children of Israel. And we're going to come back to this a couple of weeks from now. We're going to actually revisit this verse time and time again, because this is the concept of blood guilt. You have several concepts here. You have the idea that a land, not just a people, but a land can be polluted. You have the idea that blood itself defiles the land. Remember, we are told that if we slaughter an animal, we are to pour its blood out upon the ground. There's this idea of justice, and when humanity becomes unjust, the land itself becomes heavy burdened with our guilt, with our iniquity. And in scripture, it also says that it will vomit you out of the land if it becomes too great. And there's other judgments that can occur as well for bearing blood guilt. And notice also this aspect of blood cannot be cleansed but by the hand of he who shed it. And so what we're going to look at now is what happens when that atonement, when that expiation does not occur within the hand of him that shed it. What happens when a murderer walks free and there is no rectification for his children, for his family? And this is what we're going to look at, is when a household bears guilt. So we're going to look now at premeditated murder. What happens when premeditated murder is not expiated? This is from Job. And again, I mentioned last week, it's very important to know who is speaking. When you follow the words of Eliphaz and his two counselors to Job, you find a lot of Edomite theology. When you follow Job's words, you find ideas that are closer, much, much closer to the biblical paradigm and to Torah. So this was what Job had to say regarding injustice on the land, where people, and again, God has put the execution of justice into the hands of government. So when government fails to execute justice and judgment, or when it does so unrighteously, this is what lays up for the third and fourth generation of those that hate Yahovah and his ways. Job 21, verse 16. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. How often is the candle of the wicked put out? How often comes their destruction upon them? God distributes their sorrows in anger. They are as stubble before the wind, and as chaff as the storm carries away. God lays up his iniquity for his children. He rewards him, and he shall know it. So you find this idea that if that crime is not expiated within the man that committed it, then it becomes this burden, or this debt that is owed by his family for their forefathers' sin. So just a really quick summary before we get into a very specific case that shows this in a real life situation. So number one, iniquity, especially the blood guilt, should be required by society, by the person who commits the crime. This whole idea of eye for eye, tooth for tooth. When no justice or expiation occurs, that debt is laid up for a man's wicked children. After 3 to 4 generations continue to rebel against Yahovah, the payment for justice becomes due, as Yahovah's mercy has expired. Justice takes place within the wicked who hate Yahovah. It does not take place within the righteous who love him and show it by keeping his commandments. And this is a very important distinction. We're not going to focus on this latter part yet. We're going to come back to this towards the end when we talk about how this can be healed, because there is a process by which this can be healed so that this debt is not laid up for children. But for now, we want to see how it works in a real world situation. So we are going to look at 2 specific cases. Now, tonight we are only going to look at Eli's house. Next week we are going to look at Joab's house, and then branch out into more general applications. But tonight we're going to really focus on Eli. It may be remembered that Eli was actually a very righteous priest. He was the priest at the time of Samuel, and he served Yahovah, it appears, in the capacity of high priest there at Shiloh. But he had one thing that he did not do. He did not correct his children when they sinned. There is indication that his children robbed. There is some indication that his children, mainly his 2 sons, murdered. people. That would be Hophni and Phinehas, that they had murdered others, and that they executed their office, that which was supposed to be a representation of Yahweh, a representation of justice and judgment, and they perverted everything, and they oppressed, and they took advantage of their office for gain. Everything that Yahweh despises, Eli's sons did, and could have, if they did that, then Eli should have removed them from office. He should have taken that out of their hands, and he did not. So even though Eli was righteous, he refused to correct his sons. So we're going to look at, oh, hold on. I'm sorry. This slide is for next week. I had to redo some things last minute. Oh, that one wasn't supposed to be here either. Sorry about this, guys. Okay. So now we're going to go to Eli and his sons. Yeah, those slides are going to be for next week, and we'll delve in deeper into those. So Eli and his sons. So when Samuel is very, very young, there comes a man. It appears he would be today, he would be termed a prophet, that issues a prophecy against both Eli and his household. And this is what the prophet said, or the prophecy that he made against Eli's house. It says, "And there came a man of God to Eli and said unto him, Thus says Yahweh, Did I plainly appear to you in the house of your father when you were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, to wear the ephod before me? And did I give to you the house of your father and all the offerings made by fire to the children of Israel? Why have you kicked at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honor your sons above me, and make yourselves fat with the chief of all the offerings of my people Israel?" So this phrase "kicked" that I have in orange, kicked at my sacrifice. This idea of kicking, that's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 31 and 32. And that always is it within the connotation of rebelling. So if you kick, it is to rebel. And what Yahweh is telling Eli is that he honors his children above honoring God, rather than following the instructions in the law that were given to his forefather in Egypt, or rather as they came out of Egypt. Rather than following those instructions that are in Exodus and Leviticus, and honoring Yahweh, rather he honors his sons in place of Yahweh. He honors them above him, and he allows his children to continue to oppress the people. And one way that they do this is they take the best of all the offerings of the children of Israel, things that they are not entitled to, they confiscate from the children of Israel to themselves. Miriam asked, who was this prophet? We are not told. In the Judges era and the early monarchy era, a lot of the prophets do not have names. And then there's a lot of ambiguity early on until it becomes an official office of state under Samuel and David, as the kingdom or the monarchy is instituted. So you see this office kind of morphs, but it becomes something that is a little bit more structured as time goes on. But at the very beginning, we are not told who these people are. So this is the original prophecy that is made against Eli and his house. We all know the story a short time later, where Samuel is sleeping as a very young child. And oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Hold on. Let me not get ahead of myself, because we're still with the man who speaks against Eli and his house. Let's continue the prophecy of what this man of God says. He says, "Wherefore Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now, Yahweh says, Be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, that there shall be not an old man in your house. You shall see an enemy in my habitation, and all the wealth which Jehovah shall give Israel, there shall not be an old man in your house forever. And the man of yours, whom I shall not cut off from my altar, shall be to consume your eyes and to grieve your heart, and the ensigns of your house shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be the sign to you that shall come upon you. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, in one day both of them shall die. So the death of Hophni and Phinehas in one day is the sign that everything else is going to happen. It's the sign that in the flower of their age, in the flower of their life, they are going to die. Those that do indeed live of his house, they're not going to be offering sacrifices. They're not going to be executing the office of priest. So they will be a source of grieving because they will not be executing the office of their father, but rather that will fall to other people within the Levites. So this is a very dire warning. It's a very dire prophecy against Eli and his house. And we're going to see how this goes into action. So judging Eli's house. This is now, this is when Samuel is sleeping in the tabernacle. And if you'll remember the story, he hears the voice, what was shown from this man of God to Eli, who knows how many years before. It could have been a couple years, it could have been a decade prior. And Jehovah said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of everyone that hears it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all the things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons have made themselves vile, and he has not restrained them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor with offering forever. So Jehovah is equating the sin of Eli's sons with their execution of the priest office as equivalent to murder, so that it shall not ever be purged by sacrifice, but rather it has to be purged by the hand of him who commits the crime. Now, I want to go back to this one slide really quick and show you one more thing that this prophet of God says. If you'll notice, this is going to be, let's see, right around middle. This is, I have it in white, kind of sandwiched between the two yellow fonts, where it says, You shall see an enemy in my habitation. Just remember this statement, because you will see that the prophecies that are issued come about in very precise manners. All right, so we're going to go back through the slide we just looked at with Yahweh's prophecy to Samuel, where it is the exact same one for the man of God. And now we're going to look at this is the sign of the man of God being fulfilled. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible incident that actually provides the fulfillment of the sign. Now, this is when the Israel is routed in battle, they are defeated, and the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant. And let me catch Marion's comment right here. She says, it is hard for one to honor Hashem above your children. Right. It's hard. And you find so many times, I don't know how many of you guys have seen this with pastors, with religious people. And, I would say that perhaps even myself struggle with this, is when you love Yahweh, you love his word, you want to share with it, everyone in the world with it. And you see that perhaps time is short, and sharing that with people is so important, but you have to remember to balance that with family and to teach your children, to train them in the way, and to bring them along with you and not make it something that is just yours alone. And I think that is a very can be a tough act to balance, but it can be done. I've seen so many people who have done it well. And with Eli's case, it had an extra onerous or an extra responsibility because it was a government capacity where the people brought offerings to the temple, and the priest had the job of justly dividing and distributing among the people and sharing in that covenant meal with Jehovah. And they, of course, despised that office. So now this is coming back to this slide. This is 1 Samuel 4, verses 17 through 22. Israel has been routed in battle, the ark has been captured, and a runner or a messenger comes to Shiloh with news of the ark's capture. And this is what Eli is told. So Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there is a great slaughter among the people. And your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of the God is taken. And it came to pass when he made mention of the ark of God that he, referring to Eli, fell off his seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. And his daughter-in-law, Phinehas's wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed with her pains came upon her. At about the time of her death, the woman that stood by her said to her, Fear not, for you have borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. Now notice she is being lost in the flower of her youth, along with her husband and her brother-in-law. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because her father-in-law and her husband had died. And she said, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. So notice how accurately the man of God's prophecy is fulfilled. Now, it's not all fulfilled at one time. The only thing that is fulfilled right now is the sign that the rest of the prophecy is actually going to occur, or that it's going to happen. So, which leads us to the next part of this story, and it brings in now the remaining living generations of Phineas or Phineas and Eli's house that remained in Israel, because it's only his two sons that were carrying the ark into battle that were slain. So we are given some indication as to the lineage of Eli as it existed during the days of King Saul. This is speaking of Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, and the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli. So here we have a lineage where it goes Eli, Phinehas, Ahitub, Ahimelech, and Abiathar. Now, we're going to look at the story of Abiathar in a minute. But here, I just want you to focus on the lineage, where it says, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and has fled to David. So this is just the reason I included this slide, so that you could see the text from which we can reconstruct this lineage of Eli's house. Now, we have to return to the law for a moment, because the law had very specific rules and regulations for the priesthood. And Yahovah actually goes out of his way to make it very clear that the priest portion, the portion that was considered holy, it was part of a meat offering, it was a bread, and it was wine. This sanctified portion that the priests were to eat before Yahovah could only be eaten by the priests and their immediate households. If a daughter marries off, she can no longer eat of it. If a priest marries outside of the priesthood, then sometimes he can't even partake of this. So there's very, very stringent rules and regulations for eating and partaking of the hallowed bread. And this is the law of the showbread. Now, there's some, if you read it in the KJV, some of the translation is not always accurate, but it is this idea that it is a hallowed bread, and it is also the idea that part of this bread, at least, is set before Yahweh in the tabernacle, in the whole outside the Holy of Holies, with the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick, and the table where the showbread is ordered every single day. So this is the instruction from Exodus 29. You shall take the ram of the consecration and seethe his flesh in the holy place. Now, this is specifically referring to the sanctification of Aaron and his sons in their office as priesthood. But as we're going to see, this actually has a broader implication as we investigate this. So it says, and Aaron and his son shall eat the flesh of the ram and the bread that is in the basket by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And they shall eat these things wherein the atonement was made to consecrate and to sanctify them. But a stranger shall not eat thereof, because they are holy. So when you eat of these holy items, it sanctifies you and it makes you holy. So these items are restricted only for the priesthood. Verse 34. And if aught of the flesh of the consecrations or of the bread remain until the morning, you shall burn the remainder with fire. It shall not be eaten, because it is holy. Now we're going to continue on into Leviticus, where it talks about the holiness of the priest in partaking of the meal. And this would have been the offerings, the tithes and the offerings that Israel would have brought into the tabernacle for the sustenance of the priest. It says, they shall be holy unto their God, and not profane the name of their God, for the offerings of Yahweh made by fire, and for the bread of their God they do offer, therefore they shall be holy. Notice again that there's this idea that the sacrifice as well as this bread is holy unto Yahweh. They shall not take a wife that is a whore or profane, neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband, for he is holy unto Yahweh. You shall sanctify him, therefore, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy unto you, for Yahweh which sanctifies you, I am holy. So you have this right here. You have this idea that this bread is hallowed, it is sanctified, it is only for the priest. But beyond that, the priest also have to have a certain moral or purified state in order to be able to eat of this bread. Now, over time, it appears the priests become rather lax in their adherence to the details of the law. And this is what we are going to find. Now, remember, let me just click back here really quick. We're just going to click back here. Notice this lineage right here. We have Eli, who will say is a righteous generation. Phinehas, who was wicked, he rebelled. Atub, we don't know. And now we're going to come to Ahimelech, who is in the 3rd generation from Phinehas. And we are going to look at something that he did. And so the background to this story is that David was fleeing from King Saul. Saul was out to kill him, and he has a small band of men, maybe 200-300 men, that are fleeing from King Saul. They are hungry, and they come to Nob, to the priest, and they are ravenous. They have left in a hurry. They have not secured any provisions. And this is the story of what occurs. It says, then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread under my house. There is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves from at least from women. So notice what Ahimelech does. He has pity for David. He has pity for his men. He's sympathetic to David's movement, and he offers David the hallowed bread. Now, who was this hallowed bread for? Only the priests. And notice this compromise that Ahimelech is willing to make. He says, well, if your men have not, if they haven't had intercourse in, at least a few days, well, I guess we can, let it go this time. He's not being this guardian of the law. He's not upholding his divine office that he has been entrusted, and he is kind of bending the rules for David. This is what David says. And David answered the priest and said to him, of a truth, women have been kept from us for about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. And the bread is in a manner common, yes, though it were sanctified this day in a vessel. So the priest gave him the hallowed bread, for there was no other bread there but the showbread, and that was taken from before Yahweh to put in the hot bread in the day from which it was taken. So here we have Ahimelech, who I'm sure is a very good, uprighteous, upstanding person, but he's willing to bend the laws of his office in order to help David out. And this is a sin that had dire consequence for Ahimelech, for his house, and for all of Eli's household. And how many times do we see that oftentimes in world history somebody makes, one mistake with something and it does indeed impact. We, in a modern sense, we could even look at if one person eats an unclean animal in a wet market in China and look at how it affects everyone else. So now let's remember that part of the curse from the man of God about Eli's house where there would be an enemy in Yahweh's house? Well, it appears that Saul had indeed, in order to secure his power, because he was not the most liked king in Israel, he had to make an alliance with the Edomites. And when Saul came to Nob to inquire if David had been there, and he discovered that David had come through Nob, he discovered that Ahimelech and the priest had aided David. There, Saul was incensed. He was very angry. So now here is Doeg, and notice what Doeg said. And Doeg would have been an enemy to Israel at this time. And here is Doeg in Yahweh's house. And so notice how accurate this prophecy is. It says, then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And then, it goes through this thing, Ahimelech says, well, he told me he was on the king's errand. I believed him. I thought he was on your side. We're all one big happy family. We're all on the same side. We're all Israelites. And of course, King Saul isn't having any of that. He's pretty much at this point a border Stalin type or Mao. He is so enraged. He is full of himself, of his own glory, that he is willing to do anything to secure his kingdom, even slaughtering and annihilating his own people, which we see this occur so many times in history when pride and arrogancies goes to someone's heart, and that's all they care about is their power. So what Saul said to Doeg, and to Ahimelech, he said, it was this. He says, and the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and your father's house. And let's carry this one step forward. And Saul had ordered his men, the Israelites, to fall on the priest. He would not. And when the Israelites would not fall on the priest, he had the Edomites that were with Doeg fall upon the priest. So this is 1 Samuel 22. King Saul said to Doeg, turn you and fall upon the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priest and slew that day 85 persons that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob, the city of priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and infants, and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped, and he fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain Yahweh's priest. All right, we're going to pause here for just a minute. What happens? This is actually a Hebrew term. It's called herem. When a particular house is sanctified or set apart for destruction, the KJV and most translations, even the JPS Tanakh, are not consistent with this because they will often translate it curse. But this is what we are seeing take place right here is a haram, is something that is set aside for destruction. And everyone in Eli's house is actually killed at this point in time, except for Abiathar. So now Abiathar, if you will recall, is going to be this fourth generation from Phinehas. He is going to be the fourth generation. And the question remains, is Abiathar going to be loyal? Is he going to walk in Yahweh's ways? So there is a lot at stake, a lot resting on Abiathar. And what you find is that Abiathar was with David in all that he did. Abiathar was loyal to David in every way. He was one of the priests that carried, if you'll remember right, or remember correctly, that the first time David tried to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, he did not look to the law. The priest did not advise him as to what should be done. And he had common men moving the ark. They did not follow any of the official protocols. And one of the priests, when he, put out his hands to steady it, that would have been Uzzah. When he put out his hand to steady it, he was he died because he did not follow the instructions for the removing or moving of the ark. And that was within the priest's purview. And the priest should have been on top of this. They should have been instructing David, and they did not. But Abiathar was not killed in this. Abiathar was very faithful to David. He was afflicted as David was afflicted, and he finally carried the ark into Jerusalem when David set up the tabernacle in Jerusalem and had all the provisions going for the temple that Solomon would eventually build. But at the end of Abiathar's life, when David is very old, and David really, really waited in naming his successor. We're not sure why David did this. Maybe it was the reluctance to admit his own mortality, or that his days were coming to an end, or who knows what David's reasonings were. But because he waited so long, another son of his ended up rebelling. The first son that rebelled was Absalom. The second son that now rebels is Adonijah. And in this rebellion, both Joab as well as Abiathar follow after Adonijah. And this is what happens in 1 Kings 1, verses 7 and 8. It says, "And he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, who helped Abiathar the priest, and they following Adonijah, and they helped him. But Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, and Shimei and Rei, the mighty men which belonged to David, were not with Adonijah." So if you will recall, shortly after this, Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, they all worked together because for the sin that David had committed with Bathsheba and the crime he had committed against her, he promised Bathsheba that her son would rule in his stead. And that, of course, would have been Solomon. So with this, there is a curse that David asks Solomon to rectify with in regards to Eli's house. So after Solomon ascends the throne, Adonijah's movement is quelled. Adonijah is basically more or less put under house arrest. It's kind of like, the next step you make, that's it. I'm extending mercy to you. But if you do anything that shows that you are trying to gain power or trying to gain the kingdom, at that point, you will forfeit your life. Well, at this point, because Abiathar had rebelled with Adonijah, Solomon fulfills this final curse against Eli's house in removing the priesthood and his right to execute the office of priest before Yahweh. And this is what King Solomon did. It says, "To Abiathar the priest said the king, Go get you to Anathoth, to your own fields, for you are worthy of death. But I will not at this time put you to death, because you bore the ark of Yahweh before David my father, and because you have been afflicted in all that my father was afflicted." So Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest unto Yahweh, that he might fulfill the words of Yahweh, which he spoke concerning the house of Eli at Shiloh. So this was a very long process. This took 4 generations for this curse to be completed. At this point in time, other priests within the house of Israel, within the house of Levi, are fulfilling this role of the high priest. Now, what you're going to find, and maybe I'll get into it later on, but the role of Eli is actually shifted and given to Zadok instead of Eli. So again, it's still within the Levitical house, but it is just shifted to a different family that then steps in to do the role that Eli would have done. Notice that nothing in this violates Yahweh's covenant with the house of Phineas. And I'm talking about the original, at the Exodus, with the prophecy that is made and the covenant of light that is given to Aaron and to his son Eliezer, where Eliezer is promised to always have a light before him, and is promised to always have descendants that can execute the office of high priest. If one house grows very evil, it is totally within Yahweh's rights to execute justice within that particular house, as long as there are other houses that still exist. So just a summary of this. In this particular aspect, we saw mercy to the 3rd and 4th generation. And this is just kind of a summary. Eli was righteous, but he would not discipline his children. He honored his children above Yahweh. Phinehas was wicked. He was killed in battle. Tub appears to have been more or less a good guy. He worked with Saul, he worked with Jonathan, and he was very much an Israelite, a priest that served Israel faithfully. Then you have Ahimelech, who appears he was a very good-hearted, a very kind-hearted guy. He was very faithful. He had a heart for, David and his movement. He likely knew that David had been anointed to replace Saul, so he was very sympathetic to that, but he was not judicious in executing and upholding the rights of the Levitical office. And he sinned by sharing the holy sanctified bread with David and his men. And then you have, and for that, Ahimelech and all of his house was slaughtered. I mean, 85 people were killed, and there likely could have even been more. So that was the Holocaust that occurred at Nob. Abiathar was the only son of Eli's house to remain. Now, the mercy in this is that Eli's house is not wiped off. Notice his house is not obliterated. There still exists descendants for his house. It's simply that his descendants can no longer execute the office of priest before Yahweh. So even within that, there is mercy that God does indeed show to Eli's house. It's just, again, they can't burn incense before Yahweh, and they cannot execute the priest office. So this is one example that we have of the limits of Yahweh's mercy to the 3rd and 4th generation. Next week, we're going to look at Job, and we are going to also bring Eli's house back in and kind of compare it with, not Job, I'm sorry, Joab. I don't know why I keep saying Job, but Joab. And we're going to see how that plays out in other stories, as well as in David's house itself, because that's another story in and of itself. So this was prequel number 3. We probably have another 2 more prequels to go before we actually get into the nitty-gritties of blood guilt. But you really have to have this understanding of 3rd and 4th generation for judgment and mercy before you really understand this whole concept of blood guilt as well. So any questions that you guys have? Um, okay, Marlene says it flies in the face of current thought because people think that they are being very spiritual if they believe that mercy is more important than obedience. Yeah, that's it's really really tough because it has to be balanced. If you are too much on the justice side where there is no mercy, that's oppression. If there's too much mercy and not enough justice, that's oppression. So it really has to be a balance between justice and mercy. So thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. I hope you will join us in the morning for United Israel World Union at 10:30 on the United Israel page. I don't know that I will be there. It is my daughter's birthday, and we are going to take some family time tomorrow, and I'll see you guys in another week. So have a great week. Any questions that you have, feel free to post during the week. Shabbat Shalom.